had some, various cleanup language in numerous areas, but most notably, which is difficult to explain, a change in some of the seniority language, which will help reduce some of the overtime that management incurs as they have temporary supervisors fill in their area. So this is a significant language change that will help them with their overtime issues. The economic package, which is probably most notable for you, the first year is a 2.5% increase to wages. The second year is a 2.25% increase to wages. Both of those were actually under our budgeted number. We have negotiated longevity into this contract. Longevity is comparable, and so we did negotiate longevity. We did have a number budgeted for longevity, and we're under that number. So we feel pretty good about that piece as well.
Does when you say you negotiated longevity, you increase it or add?
We added it. We added longevity.
You're again what that is without looking through here.
The actual figures itself, John? Is that what you want? Okay, just a moment. Let me get to it.
The range of compensation and when it kicks in
Yep,
after
just
so
let me-
many
So
years.
many years.
Let me just get to it real quick, if I can find it, unless my staff have it behind me.
And Doug, I have a question too about some other terms of the contract to reduce overtime, but would you prefer we held our questions until you're done?
I'll do my best. That one will be a challenge to explain, but I'll do my very, very best.
There's some we should ask guys too.
Mhm.
Let's see.
When we get to the section, I'll tell you the longevity numbers.
Oh, looks like it's on page 58.
Oh, thank you. You found it before I did.
Does that sound right?
Yep, that is correct. So those are the numbers. ATU had actually come in with a different proposal. We negotiated to a much lesser rate for longevity. One of the logical questions would be, what did you get for that?
Sure.
I mean, that's always the question that would be followed up in that. We were successful in moving this group from their current health plan design to our, what I call our base health plan design, which is very significant for us. It moves them off into a mandatory generic pharmacy program. This is what we have several of our other plans on, which we're seeing good returns, good results on. So that was part of the economic package, if you will, John, in that sense. So getting our health care plan design in place was key. They were still on one of the richer plans. We did move them from a single of 95% paid to 92, so 95.5 to 92.8. And then on 2-4 and family, went to 80-20 to 85-15.
Oh, so family went up,
So the family went up to
so we have to pay more.
comparability, yes, yes.
And what do you figure on an annual basis those plans cost?
I don't have that number right there that I could give you, John, in terms of the premiums, because we've not actually calculated the premium equivalents for this next year. We're just in the process of doing that right now. We figured that we'd probably spend roughly $40,000 to move them to this plan. We're going to save much, much more in terms of experience and cost shifting.
Do you have an idea how many are on single versus family?
I do, I just don't have it right in front of me.
Maybe for the hearing you can have that.
For the hearing, I'll try to have that.
Okay.
Okay.
And maybe what the costs are. Just
And Doug, going back to overtime, my question deals with those that are going on vacation and substituting in, I guess, fill-in drivers for that, and the ones that have seniority in that process and procedure for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, when you say they've addressed some of the overtime issues, is that one of the overtime issues that was brought up?
Not that particular one. This is more of what they call temporary supervisors. And it deals with equal time off when someone's filling in as a temporary supervisor and allowing those temporary supervisors to equal time off, which exacerbates the overtime. So they're filling in for a supervisor who's off on vacation. I wished I could give you a more succinct description, but I think, as my colleagues will share, this particular contract, because it's just steeped in tradition, the language is something we don't see in other contracts. It's very unique. It tends to follow some of the railroad language contracts, and so it's very, very different. But these fill-in supervisors would get equal time off, and that would exacerbate the overtime. So we were able to control some of that language, and that's what our management feels is probably most significant for them.
How many people are covered by this contract?
I would say roughly, I'm going to turn to Nicole real quick and see. About 90. I was going to say 80, so 90.
And do we have an idea on the longevity of the breakdown there, of how many are in these various categories?
Yes, we do. We do. I can give you the total cost. That probably would be, more accurate.
I guess I'd like to see who's in the groups too. Do we have?
I can have that.
long we have?
I have that. I don't have my notes right at hand, but we did calculate that as we costed it. So,
Okay, if we can hear that during the public hearing.
sure.
Any other? So you said that these contracts have come in under budget, and this is part of what's budgeted in the 2016-2018 biennial budget.
Correct.
What savings would you estimate have been achieved based on the actuals that have just been finalized?
Let me find my spreadsheet as I've been kind of moving papers around real quick here. I would say over the 2 years, Larry, and this is very, very rough, I just assume you not, say, Doug, you said we
Sure.
saved this much, because I'm just adding in my head here. I'd say we probably achieved $90,000 to $100,000 savings, probably.
So maybe 45 to 50 each year,
Mhm.
roughly?
Right.
Okay. When do you think
That
you
does
could have
not take
more?
into account any savings we might realize, which would be hard to capture under the health plan, so. And what other expense we may have because of the added percentage increases, so, but just on wages and longevity.
Any other
Okay.
questions?
All right, I'd like to move on to some other areas then, thank you. I'll have those items for you for
Thank you.
public hearing this afternoon. We also have up about 4 other items for ordinances and public hearing. The first will be a new pay plan for the ex-employees. Ex-employees are those which we call excluded. They're more confidential in nature, and they're in various departments throughout the city, but they're excluded from any representation. Historically, these groups have always followed what was negotiated for their union counterparts. Not sure why that process was in place, it just was. I've always felt that these excluded unrepresented people are really represented by their management structures. And so therefore, since our negotiations have not been concluded, we're moving forward with what we think are appropriate increases for these groups. The first, as I said, is the ex-employees, and we are recommending a 2.5% increase to the ex-pay plan. That has an estimated cost of $28,950. There's about 18 or 19 people in this group, so not a large population, if you will.
And you said there are how many employees in the group?
18 or 19,
Oh, I'm sorry, the cost, pardon me.
the cost?
28,000.
$28,950.
Thank you. Is that just 1 year?
Correct. We do this on a yearly basis. Akin to that is what we call the E's. They are also excluded. And again, we're recommending a 2.5% increase to this group. Again, it's the same numbers, about 18 or 19 people here. The cost for this group is $38,160.
Doug, when was the last time both of these groups have had a raise?
Last year,
Last year, and what was last year's?
Jane, I don't have that. I think it was very, very comparable, but I don't have the exact figure. 2.25, 25, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
As these, on these individuals too, they've still got the steps that they can advance through as well. so
That's
that-
correct. That's correct.
Was that an adjustment between the steps, or has it always been constant at 2.75%?
That's correct. It's always been the same.
75%.
The vast majority of these people are already at the maximum because of the longevity across the city. So the steps are somewhat irrelevant. There's some that we may infuse that are new, but this is a very small group, and most of them have quite a bit of longevity with the city.
And these have, do these two have longevity bonuses?
I believe. Longevity
Yes.
pay? Yes. Yes, they do. Yes. Okay.
But it could be at a different scale than what
Oh,
was
absolutely.
negotiated.
Every group is different scale, Jane, yes.
Okay.
What's
Yes.
the difference between an X and an E, please?
It's basically the classification, John. You'll find the X's to be more of your clerical staffs. For example, we have legal secretary 1, 2, senior office assistant, account clerk 1, 2, and 3, employment clerk, benefits clerk, human resources clerk. So more of our clerical types. Our E's are the more professional paraprofessionals. Those would be my human resource generalist, compensation technicians, 1s and 2s, employment techs, 1s and 2s, payroll administrator, payroll specialist, workers' comp claim specialist, grant coordinator, 1 and 2. So more of the professional paraprofessionals, okay? The next one's a little more complicated. We're gonna create a new pay plan called the W group. As you may or may not know, in the M pay plan, which is our senior management group, represented by LMCEA, the M pay plan has contained both the represented and unrepresented people in that same pay plan. So whenever something was negotiated by LMCEA, the unrepresented employees, by default, got the same increase or the same decrease or the same change in health insurance or something else. So by virtue of them being in the same exact pay plan, they were held to the same parameters or economic conditions of the contract. So if longevity was changed, it was changed for unrepresented. If the pay was changed, or if you recall the last 2 years, they got a lump sum increase. They didn't have an actual pay adjustment, just a lump sum payment. That was the same for unrepresenteds. So in essence, many times at the table, this LMCEA union would say, well, we somewhat negotiate for the unrepresented also, which should not be the case. They're unrepresented, they should be represented then by their management structure or by the mayor's office. So we've taken steps to move them out of this M pay plan and move them into what's going to be developed with your concurrence and approval, a W pay plan. That is the exact plan which they are currently in terms of the pay ranges. It'll just be substitute from an M1 to a W1, an M2 to a W2, an M3 to a W3. So we're taking action in all of the code to insert the word, the letter W wherever it says all the different pay plans, we're inserting W. And that's basically it. We then create the actual pay plan itself. And as we create that pay plan, rather than waiting for the conclusion of LMCEA labor negotiations, we also put a 2.5% increase in place for these unrepresented employees. That has a cost of about $118,000, and I believe that is about 42 employees. Is that correct? I'm getting a nod, yes. So 42 employees who are unrepresented. So that's what we're doing here. It's a little convoluted because, as you can see, they were all blended into one pay plan before. We felt that was cumbersome and awkward. It gave us angst if we were going through any sort of data. We'd had to split them out manually. We could not really parse them because everything is done by virtue of an employee's connection to the pay plan. within our payroll systems. So here's the action to separate them out, put them on their own pay plan, create that 2.5% increase, which we find commensurate with everything else.
Explain the pay system, let us do 2 letters.
Oh, I can do that too, unless you want to add.
I can,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Don has another item to add to that kind of tells a little bit about the cumbersome nature of why we couldn't split them out previously.
Don taught with the city attorney's office, just by way of history, would have predated Doug, but the formation of the M Union happened in 2007. And at the time that occurred, it was understood that there were certain employees, and by definition of the CIR, you don't have employees in the same bargaining group that would supervise other employees in the same kind of classification, or you exclude employees that would, by virtue of their work, would be of confidential nature, as Doug has referred to with the E's and the X's. There were a number of classifications that were defined as being excluded or unrepresented, and that list has essentially remained the same over the years, and that's part of what I think you probably have as part of, on your agenda, the list of the 42, the classifications of those 42 employees. Further complicating the matter was that our payroll system won't let us designate 2 letters for a pay plan. So we wanted to call the unrepresented M's from day one the MX. Well, we couldn't do that. So they've always been, up to this point in time, included in the M group and kind of under that same pay plan. And so that kind of helps further explain some of the reasoning, I think, as to why Doug wants to separate them out, to make that distinction so that they're no longer everything just going right along with what the LMCEA group is negotiating, because this group truly is not this would be like your city engineer, your budget officer, your assistant chief of police, your assistant fire chief,
Your attorneys.
the attorneys, a number of those. So I mean, again, there's 42 employees in that group. It's not a large group, but of the 3 groups that Doug has talked about today, the E's, the X's, and the M's, those are the only employees in the city that aren't represented by a bargaining unit. 78 employees, basically. So.
On these, I notice you have 4 categories, essentially, or 4 levels on that. And when someone's hired in this category, I mean, these are professional type people, do they start at the lower, or is it at the discretion of human resource stuff, where they start, or what step, or what?
It's really the discretion. I mean, you may have someone who comes in with 20 years experience and they've already moved in their pay history above, that minimum level. In other situations, they may start at the minimum. I had someone start new in my department who was in the category, and I started them very low in the pay range, and that accounted for a great salary savings within my budget. But that's not the case in every situation. We have maybe, higher level finance positions that people come with 15, 20 years of experience, and starting at the minimum of the pay range just is not feasible to be competitive with other sectors. So it really is individually dependent, John.
How long does it take them to advance to that top tier?
This is not a step situation, so this is based purely on merit, and it's based upon whatever percentage increases, a range of basically 1 to 4% on their merit evaluations throughout the year. So that's hard to say how long it may take. We don't have nearly as many people at maximum as we do within the step plans.
I think if you were to look at the longevity of the people in those classifications, John, you'd find that they're pretty much all at the top of the range, because they've been here for a long time.
They move up within the system probably.
And the chart shows it on hourly basis, but, like the legal department, you have people that toil the midnight hours.
Well, right, and again, that's kind of a function of our payroll system, that we break everything down, no matter whether it's truly a salaried position. It's broken down all the way to the hourly level, even though it is truly a salaried position. Regardless of the number of hours you work, you're not getting any more or any less. So.
Would it be fair to say that would apply to all the different positions here?
Oh, yeah, these are all exempt positions under FLSA.
Yeah, I mean, you can
unless they're part-time.
you know, from your own personal knowledge, you know, the number of hours that a lot of your city engineer, your engineering groups, so that they'll work, and they've got meetings well, you know, early morning, after hours, and on weekends, and what have you, so.
James?
Can you tell me why it's effective August 11th?
Yes, that is to make it coincide with kind of an anomaly we call the payroll fiscal year. So therefore, their first check will fall into the new fiscal year. So that's why the effective date there.
And that's like for the ATU contract, for example, Jane, it's effective August 11th, whereas last year it would have been probably August 12th.
There's 12th.
So it varies each year depending on, it's the first, it starts for that two-week pay cycle for the first check that falls in the new fiscal year. Works that way in the county too.
Yeah.
So outside of just changing the classification of that group to a W, were there any other pay elements changed or altered in
So,
their
as I
current
said,
plan?
a 2.5% increase to the structure, which would be their annual increase, but that's it. You know,
Nothing else is
no other
longevity
changes,
or-
no other changes to longevity, no other changes to health insurance. You know, there may be some things we do down the line, but those all have to come forward and things like that, so.
On these, for example, you know, health insurance has been one we've looked at over the years. What type of, like, single versus family coverage, what's the split on what the employee pays versus what the city pays?
I think for this group, it's 8911 for 2 foreign family, and it's, I want to say it's 98.2.
88 too, yeah.
For single.
I'm not a good historian on memorizing the 6 or 7 different groups that we have and the different levels, John. I have to look them up. It's comparable. It would follow LMCEA as a result, you know, and so it'd be the same thing because that's what we did. Now we have the ability to change that if we would like to. Because this would be unrepresented, we could then change those percentages if we felt that was the right thing to do for an employee group on our own that we represent.
And this group did go to the, as Doug described it, as the base plan,
Right.
probably 3 years ago.
Right.
Which has the higher out-of-pocket maximum and the higher deductible, and higher co-insurance. So,
I might suggest to our chair that at some future time we have a pre-council to discuss our health benefit, our medical benefits and different plans, so we can review the deductibles, the co-pays.
We can do that.
Sort of thing.
I think that would be helpful, because I know in the county, we do it on an annual, semi-annual basis in some cases, just to see where we're trending, and I think,
We do it on the city as well. It
Mhm.
just,
Oh, you do? Oh, okay.
it's done at the mayor's level. Doesn't come down here, but we're happy
Right.
to share it with you, so.
I think it would be helpful, so
Among all the
that.
bargaining groups and everything, just
Mhm.
to see a.
Mhm.
We'd be happy to do that. We have the information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Those were the highlights. Go ahead, Carl. Sorry.
Doug, I see that there are 6
Oh.
classifications that have been deleted.
Correct,
A little
thank
bit
you.
about that.
One more thing, and those are just vacant classifications that are not being used, so we're just doing this, taking this opportunity at one time to kind of clear the books of unused classifications. And we try to do that on a more regular basis, but it takes action at council and does kind of, add to your agenda, but we thought we'd bring them forward at this point and clean up the pay plan. Okay? Okay?
Thanks very much.
Thanks for the time, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right,
Yep.
next up, planning. Thanks, yeah, yes, please do introduce, and appreciate you coming forward to explain some of the proposals you have before the council.
Sure. Thank you for the time today. I'm just going to introduce, and then we'll have Andrew Theroff and Rachel Jones. They are basically the authors of the proposals that have come forward. Steve is here as well to answer questions. What we have, and we thought would be a good idea, is to give you a heads up on an item that's on first reading today. Hearing will be next week on a number of different zoning code changes, all of which are either more or less cleanup items that make sense to move forward with, or things that we've already been employing on a case-by-case basis, so it makes sense to move forward with a formal change, or have included significant public discussion and process to date. Both of these items have been approved unanimously by the Planning Commission already. We thought it would be, instead of throwing about 28 individual items at you all at once and expect you to be ready to hear them at a hearing next week, we thought it'd be good to take a moment to walk through them and let you have a chance to answer questions today. And with that, what we have is Andrew will go first on his item, and then Rachel will go through her items with kind of a quick PowerPoint, and then open it up for questions after that.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'll talk about accessory buildings, and then Rachel's going to talk about some other miscellaneous text amendments. We did run these through the public input process together. That's kind of a summary of it up there. May 1st, we posted everything online. May 5th, we sent out an email to the development community and neighborhood representatives. On June 6th, we met with the Clinton Neighborhood Association. They requested us to come out there. And then June 13th, we were at the Mayor's Roundtable, and again, kind of put all the information out there for any neighborhood representatives to come. And then August 3rd, we had the Planning Commission hearing for these text amendments. Specifically for accessory buildings, we did have one person in support at the Planning Commission hearing for these text amendments.
Did I read in the staff report that you had a committee prior to May 1st?
Yep, and I'm going to jump into that. Yeah, and for these accessory building text amendments, we did have a working group that helped out too. So the goal with these accessory building text amendments was to develop a better way of regulating accessory buildings in residential areas. The focus and kind of the big purpose of this was looking at adding area standards into the zoning ordinance. But when we looked at this, while we're updating area, we kind of looked at other accessory building things, kind of cleanup items, since we're already there editing.
Area standards, is that like areas of the city?
Maximum building area, like square footage, yeah. So, yeah, so actually, so an accessory building is a subordinate building or any portion of the main building, so it's an accessory use, basically. So we're looking at residential accessory buildings, so it's anything that would be accessory to a house. So like a garage or a workshop or a shed, anything like that. So the working group we put together was composed of neighborhood organization representatives, people in the development community, and just others that would be interested in what's going on in Lincoln. We met with them multiple times over the course of a couple months, got a lot of input, as you can guess, there were a lot of different ideas, but in the end we came up with what I think was a good consensus and something that I think everyone in the working group is happy to stand behind. So I'll walk through some of the cleanup items, and then we'll get to area real quick, because that's where the big changes were. So the first kind of cleanup change we did was for garages. A garage would be a type of accessory building. In the ordinance now, a garage is defined, just in definition, it can't have more than 4 bays. But we thought, since now we're looking at area, the number of bays specifically doesn't matter. It's about area. So striking out the 4-bay requirement was something we looked at. So another way that accessory buildings are regulated today is by setbacks. So this is an existing regulation. So if you're within 6 feet of the main building, so for example, an attached garage would still be accessory. But if you're within 6 feet of the house, you just have to meet the setback requirements of the house, more or less. If you're more than 6 feet from the house, you can be within 2 feet of the side and rear lot line. So you get a little more space if you're 6 feet from the house. And as shown in this example, the common thing is the little shed back in the corner. A lot of people have the shed, just like 3 feet from their fence line. And we're not changing that. That's an existing regulation. And then there is a kind of a rare circumstance where if you have 2 front yards, one yard's along a major street. This example is along Old Cheney. Old Cheney's on the north there. Technically, both those yards are front yards, but one of the front yards you can put accessory buildings in because it's basically acting as your rear yard. A few other additional regulations: height. If you're within that building envelope where the house can be, you can be the same height as the house, so 35 feet in our residential districts. If you're in the rear yard today, you can be 15 feet tall. And then one of those double frontage lots like that I showed just last slide, you can be 8 feet tall in one of those front yards. So this is existing. So what we're looking to add is also if you're in the side yard, there'd be a 15-foot height. And this is actually the way building and safety has been enforcing it right now, and that's the way it appears that was the intent of the ordinance. It just wasn't quite written that way. So we're just adding in also 15 feet in the side yard, just kind of more of a point of clarification. Yeah, so you'd have 2 front yards, and then, one would be the side and one would be the rear. So if you're in the side or rear, it would be 15 feet still. And then this is an existing one too, lot coverage. You can fill 40% of the rear yard. So for residential lots, the rear yard's, say, 20 feet. You could fill 40% of that 20-foot area. So in terms of building area, it's not in the ordinance today, but there is a building and safety policy that effectively enforces maximum accessory building area. This is the policy. So for all lots within the city limits, the maximum is 2,000 square feet. And then when you get outside the city in the 3 mile, that goes up to 6,000 square feet, depending on lot size. And this worked generally pretty well. But when we talked to the working group about this, they did identify a few issues. One was some representative home builders that were building a lot of acreage style lots. They were looking to have more area. And then our representatives from the neighborhood associations that were in some of the older neighborhoods with the smaller lots, 2,000 square feet was just like a lot. It seemed like way too much. So what we came up with was a kind of a stair-step standard based on lot size and zoning district. And we'll just briefly walk through it. I do have a handout.
Here, Andrew, pass it around.
That has all of the information on it, and then the staff report does too. But we'll walk through it real quick here. So there's a maximum and an expanded maximum. The maximum is what, if you can meet all those other setback, height regulations, all those things we talked about, you can build to the maximum. And the working group felt that these were good numbers. So you can see, so for the smallest lots, less than 7,500 square feet, the maximum is actually cut in half. It's cut down from 2,000 down to 1,000 square feet. Something to keep in mind is that 1,000 square feet is still quite a bit of area. A typical garage stall is somewhere like 250 square feet. So even with 1,000 square feet, in theory, someone could do like a 4-stall garage. So it's still quite a bit of area. But you can step up to this, what we're calling an expanded maximum, if you can meet a few other additional regulations. And just for time's sake, I won't walk through all of them, but basically what those are if you keep the buildings out of the setbacks, so if you keep your accessory buildings within the main envelope of where the house would be, and then for most of the smaller lots, as long as the accessory building isn't bigger than the house, you can step up to this expanded maximum. That's true. But one thing to note, so say you have an 800 square foot house, you could still do the maximum, the 1,000 foot maximum. You just wouldn't be able to go up to the 1,500 square foot maximum. And so this maximum, expanded maximum idea applies as you get, the numbers just get bigger as you get into bigger lots. And then one thing to note is for the acre or more lots, there's no requirement that it has to be bigger than the house, or that it has to be smaller than the house. Looking at the existing character of acreage lots, a lot of times you have buildings, the accessory buildings are much bigger than the house. So we're just looking at maintaining that existing character. AGR is the same idea with the maximum and expanded maximum, but of course, once you get larger, people could have 6,000 square feet of a huge storage building. They're not going to have a 6,000 square foot house. So we're not really looking at a connection to house size for these types of lots. And then the same idea for the AG lots in the 3 mile. One thing to know is 10 acres or more, just said there's no maximum, because when you're looking at the existing large lots out in the country that are AG, some of them have quite a bit of accessory buildings. and we're not looking at really changing the character of that type of development in any way.
So with the work you've done to try and make sure that we have build through design, is it seamless with that kind of concept that sort of the location of the homes won't prohibit future growth as the city grows and becomes more dense at the edge, with agricultural zoned areas becoming urban? Does the potential for a really large accessory unit have any conflict with the build through design concept, or is there any provision about that in these new packages of information?
When looking at these large acreage lots, these numbers actually pretty closely reflect what basically is being developed now and what's out there today. So no, we don't think it really doesn't change much of anything in a way, is to look at it in terms of what's being developed. There's large ag buildings out on acreages
Yeah.
today.
And in most of our build-throughs, the lots are in the 1 to 3 acre size.
Okay.
And so there would still be the 6,000 to 8,000 square foot maximum.
Okay.
And typically, even a 6,000 square foot building is not cheap, but there's not quite the investment in there that if you're later thinking that the city water and sewers expanded and you're thinking of cutting your 1 or 2 acre lot into a couple of lots, either there's not that much investment in the building, it's now 30 or 40 years old, or what we've also seen in some cases is the house was here and the accessory building was here, and the accessory building is split off onto a lot and sold with the lot. So the new homeowner gets that accessory building to go along with their lot to build another house, and the homeowner on the other side just builds a new garage or decided they didn't want that much accessory building.
I was just thinking I would hate for someone to invest a lot of resources in a really large structure that then somehow, they don't have
Right.
the ability to keep it on their property as the city grows, or sell it off. I guess.
Yeah, so typically the build-throughs aren't on the 10 acres or more where you might
Right.
have, in this case, allowing 20 or 30,000 square feet. Almost all of our build-throughs are 3 acres or less, and so there still relatively won't be that much square footage.
Yeah.
Couple different questions. First of all, there were houses, grand houses, built 100 years ago that had garage apartments oftentimes that were pretty large in scope and scale, and I'm wondering how those fit in with this, and whether, if that style were to come back, which it may. In fact, as I travel in different cities, I see a lot of that happening where existing neighborhoods, someone might buy two lots with existing houses and just knock them down and build a new McMansion on the space with a large garage apartment. So are we anticipating what different options, and do those options fit?
Yeah, and so this amendment would actually make that easier than the current policy today, because right now they'd be capped at 2,000 no matter what.
Right.
So what you'd be talking about would probably be these 7,500 to 20,000 square foot lots,
Yeah.
maybe even a little bigger than that, where they could go up to potentially 3,000 square feet of accessory building space.
Okay.
And actually, the one person who spoke at the Planning Commission in support of this was, I think they were in the Piedmont neighborhood, and it was like an 1.5 acre lot, and they were looking to build a large, almost like a carriage house type
Mhm.
building,
Mhm.
and they couldn't do it today, but with these amendments, it would allow
Okay.
for that, so.
Yeah, I would think, Carl, with, longevity and all, take care of parents, you might have a situation where they come and do the carriage house or first floor carriage house type of approach.
And we will toss in, this is accessory buildings, and accessory buildings don't allow currently dwelling units. And so we do think as a separate action, we do have a lot of people who do that very request of us, and today, in most of our R1 to R4 zoning districts, you can't do the separate accessory dwelling unit for family members. Because typically most of the houses are on lots that only allow single family, or the single family all has to be within, if you have to do that for 2 family, it all needs to be within 1 structure. And so we do think that there's some merit to coming back to you with setting up a process where people could do exactly that, because that is becoming a much bigger trend for people who either want to renovate space to add an accessory dwelling unit, or we've even seen, pre-made units that are even set up that are handicap accessible, larger showers and everything else, so that you can have older family members live on site, but still have a separate unit. So this one is just treating the accessory buildings with the parking and storage of your bicycles and cars and all those type of things. It doesn't yet address the accessory dwelling units, which we think has some merit in the future.
Are there any current exceptions that you could apply for under the current?
Currently, we don't have a special permit process, and so that's one of the things, because there's pros and cons. We've had people who've expressed concern that, well, they'll do it initially for a family member, but when that family member moves on, they'll rent it out. And so then the concern becomes, hold it, we'll have a lot of extra rental apartments being added to a neighborhood. And so some communities have a requirement that the owner has to live on site, so it's not done under that the entire property becomes rental. Some of them have very much limits on the amount, how big the dwelling units can be, to try to address that. But that is a whole other topic, but one that we certainly see not only in our community but nationwide, a lot more emphasis on that.
Thank you.
And that, unless you have any more questions on accessory dwelling units, that might be a good point to switch over to talk about the other ones, because the other ordinance is 102 pages long. And so we wanted to at least try to hit some of the highlights for you from that. So Rachel can talk about the next part.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk to you about what we're calling our 2016 text amendments, and this is just a group of about 30 individual text amendments that are moving together through the process. And as David talked about initially, these really are minor corrections, minor amendments, mostly simplifying language, correcting errors, reducing requirements that might be excessive, that we've learned over time or through experience or feedback that are excessive.
Rachel, do you mind moving the microphone just a little bit
Yeah.
closer to you? Thank you.
So I'm going to go through a few examples today, just to discuss in detail, and if you have questions about those, or maybe you have questions about some of the others, that's fine too. The first topic that we will go through is reducing the parking requirement for unenclosed retail sales accessory buildings. And to start out with, most of our parking requirements are based on floor area, and this particular amendment would specify that these unenclosed buildings would not count towards the floor area for parking requirements. And the best example of this is lumber storage for home improvement stores. Typically those have some kind of cover over them, whether they're fully enclosed. They wouldn't be fully enclosed, but they would have some kind of covering, or perhaps a garage that stores materials that is not that is left open during the day. We would specify those do not count towards parking demand, because they really wouldn't generate parking demand in the same way that floor area within a store would generate it. And I'll also mention that we've had both of our North and South Menards come through to specify this on their use permit, and this would just be codifying that requirement. You can go ahead. The next one I'll talk about is requiring a minimum amount of on-street guest parking for 2-family dwellings in community unit plans, planned unit developments, and use permits. And this would only apply for those with narrow lots that have garages which take access to the street. And the reasoning behind this is that when each of those dwellings has a driveway, it reduces the curb space for guests to park. And we've had some developments in the past that have had very narrow lots with all of these driveways, and guests have a hard time finding parking and often end up blocking people's driveways and that kind of thing. So we would want to require that minimum parking there. And this is often required case by case today for various developments, and this would again simply be codifying that. This requirement could either be met through on-street parking, i.e. curb space, or through some developments have done a parking lot at the end of a cul-de-sac or something like that.
Did you get any feedback from the home builders or townhome developments on that?
This is the result of some feedback we've heard over time, especially from residents who live in these developments. But it's also the case that the home builders would want to assist these people long-term in having a development that works for them.
Did they say anything against that, though?
We haven't had any, actually we haven't had any negative feedback on any of these text amendments.
I have brought this to attention to a couple of our members of the home builders, or development community, specifically like Mike Eckert, who works a lot with developers, and already a lot of them are doing this in townhome developments because that is a concern of their customers. And we're requiring 1 per 2 dwelling units, so they've been viewing it as kind of a compromise that we've already instituted in a lot of previous community unit plans. So we've put this in as a requirement already in probably 4 or 5 over the last number of years, and most developers have been okay with that because they realize their customer wants some guest parking as well.
So the next example is reducing the required parking for medical office. Today, medical office, i.e. doctor's and dentist's office, has a higher parking requirement than other types of office. And so this would be reducing that requirement down to the same standard that we have for any other kind of typical office. And it would be reducing the requirement down from 1 space per 225 square feet to 1 space per 300 square feet. And this is kind of the result of, over time, some of the older buildings within some of our older parts of town may not have the minimum parking requirement for a doctor's office, say, to come into an existing medical park, or office park, excuse me. And so it prevents them from locating closer to neighborhoods, so we would think this would be very good to help them integrate better into neighborhoods. We have located some support from the Institute of Transportation Engineers that supports that this reduction could be implemented and still meet demand. Certainly if individual practitioners felt that they needed to provide additional parking beyond that, they could do so. This is another example where we've been implementing this case by case a lot of times, and it would be just making it more global. We had a recent use permit amendment, use permit 151A near 84th and O, that had the same parking reduction. And then the last example I have is reducing required parking for restaurants in the B1 and B3 districts. This is similar to the medical office reduction in that this would be focused primarily towards the older parts of town where existing parking lots may not be big enough to meet our current requirement. And so we would be proposing to cut the parking requirement in half for these restaurants in these districts from 1 stall per 100 square feet to 1 stall per 200 square feet. This would be very helpful in allowing, again, restaurants to locate in some of these older existing buildings, closer to neighborhoods. Many of these would have a large proportion of pedestrian traffic, as well as customers who may have takeout orders, and so they may not park there for long periods of time. The neighborhood restaurants versus the chain restaurants would probably have a lower parking demand overall, but the chains more than likely would maybe have a set amount of parking that they require wherever they locate or something, and they may ensure that they would, meet whatever they determine to be their need. another example we've had recently of this was a parking waiver at 27th and Y Streets. And that was approved by the City Council in April 2016. And that was for a restaurant that had a very small existing parking lot behind it, but wanted to expand within the existing building and couldn't meet it with the higher parking requirement for restaurants that we have today. Does anyone have questions?
So on this second package, there's actually several other amendments that are within there, but most of the rest of them were pretty straightforward. So these are the main ones that we'd had one or more comments about just as we were discussing them, and so we thought they were good to bring to your attention. But because it is a long ordinance, but most of them are pretty much a lot of cleanups and minor items that we've thought were worthy of changing over time.
John?
I guess two questions. First, did you have any resistance to any of these proposed changes from any particular group?
No.
Or maybe
So
concerns?
really none were submitted. They went through the same public involvement, public input process that Andrew mentioned at the beginning. And were sent out to the development community, sent out to neighborhood associations, and we have only received one comment on them so far, which was a letter of support on the amendments that relate to agriculture and greenhouse and urban gardens, basically which expands the areas in town where those could be permitted.
And I know some members of the development community, we've had a couple of land use attorneys call me and ask a couple of questions, but so far none of them had expressed any concerns. We actually have several people who are waiting on this package of amendments. They have a general office building that sometimes has general office tenants, sometimes medical office tenants, and they're waiting for this text amendment because it'll give them a lot more flexibility in terms of who they lease to, rather than, they have a 20,000 square foot building, but parking wise, they can only rent out 12,000 of it to medical office. So they get a vacancy and they can't rent it out to a doctor who's interested because of the parking limitation. So we have probably more people who are patiently waiting for it to happen than we've had people who have expressed a concern.
My second is actually a comment. I'd like to applaud your efforts because it appears these are steps in the right direction. I think David will remember a while back we had a lot of input from young professionals saying help us get more affordable housing, and one of the things is to try to create a regulatory environment that's more conducive to that, and I think the flavor of these text amendments appears to be in that direction. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Encourage you to continue to do things like that to help make the housing and other types of construction as affordable as possible.
We've also heard that redeveloping in the core of the city is challenging in part because of parking space, and so this clearly takes on that challenge and makes it easier for people to build businesses and create places for people to go to eat in older neighborhoods, and that should make those neighborhoods potentially more attractive to young professionals who might otherwise not choose to live there. So thank you for working on that flexibility.
I would just add one other thing about the medical parking. Where the trends are going, you're headed in the right direction, but probably not far enough in my opinion, because where the trends are going are for single practitioner, small practices that schedule people, not multiple people at the same time. Commonly known as double booking, but one person at a time on the schedule, so people are coming and leaving, and so there's not a need for, multiple parking spaces, beyond 3 or 4 even for patients, because as one patient is arriving, the other one's leaving, and because that's what people are demanding in the medical area.
Does that include audiologists?
Especially this audiologist. Because people don't want to be double booked, and people who do double book are starting to take a back seat to people who don't.
I think I counted 28 changes
Yep.
in here.
Yep.
One of them interested me, well, more than one, but this one, you changed the definition from church to religious assembly, or
Right. Yeah.
anything else? Is it just a name change, or is there anything different?
Yeah. Essentially, it was designed to be more inclusive, a more inclusive term, an updated term.
Not changing parking stall requirements or anything like that?
No, it's just an update to the definition and then revising it wherever it appears in Title 27.
Okay.
Any more questions? All right, thank you so much. Appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
All right, thank you.
Are we still gonna be televising this?
It's not.
I think we are.